Hello, hello. I am Coach Jay, and I always like to start my classes with a corny or funny dad joke. But I just wanted to say, when filling out paperwork, I'm always confused when I'm asked who to call in case of an emergency. I always answer, if I'm sick, an ambulance. If I'm in trouble, police. No doubt. Come on. All right. If you can take two deep healing breaths with me, in through the nose, out through the mouth, but feel free to close your eyes or keep them open any way you're comfortable. And one more time, in through the nose, out through the mouth. All right. Today I'm going to get a very brief, quick over all basically PTSD 101. So basically, if you're watching this either now or in the future, you're probably on one side of the betrayal spectrum or the other. Perhaps you're on both sides. Regardless, now it's a time to get a better understanding of what is post-traumatic stress disorder and how to recognize its symptoms in ourselves and others. Because obviously, if it's within ourselves, we want to be able to fix it. And if we contributed to giving it to someone else, we want to be able to be there for them as well. Now, side note, I just want to say I don't necessarily care for the term disorder, post traumatic stress disorder, when it comes to PTSD. Um, Not that I have any personal thing against that term, but I just think this is more of an injury. So for this class, I may refer to it as PTSI or post traumatic stress injury because it is an injury. All right, just like many emotional and mental injuries, PTSD comes with a set of damaging stigmas that can themselves be deadly, as they can cause those that are living with PTSD to keep quiet and avoid getting help. These stigmas are usually, like all stigmas, fueled by misinformation. So, in this particular class, I just wanted to give you a handful of myths regarding PTSD. There's quite a few of them, but these are I just found like the top five myths that you may have heard. So number one, PTSD is an invisible disease or again injury that is all in someone's head, especially when it comes to infidelity. I can't tell you how many times I'm talking to a couple and one will say, oh, he or she doesn't have PTSD from what I did. You know, they didn't go to war. And I always kind of chuckle because obviously that's misinformation. The absence of visible symptoms makes PTSD hard to, quote, see by the naked eye. This invisible wound can make it hard for family and friends to believe it's real, especially if the person hasn't personally experienced the traumatic event themselves, such as betrayal from a primary attachment, which absolutely can profoundly contribute to PTSD. Um, while it's true that you can't tell if somebody has PTSD just by looking at them, um, although sometimes if there's a loud noise and somebody by you like reacts quickly, that could be an indication because people with PTSD, loud, sudden noises like immediately brings their nervous system back into the war zone. And when I mean war zone, that could be literal war zone, or that could be the discovery of the lipstick in the glove compartment or the notes found under the mattress. I mean, that could be your war zone. But anyways, the past decade has definitely ushered in frequent use of brain imaging images to assess the effects of traumatic stress on the brain. So basically, using MRI technology, researchers now can identify changes in the neurochemical systems of the specific brain regions that involved with our stress response. And this includes the overwhelm of the stress that betrayal has on us, because betrayal stress not only has stress on our bodies, but it's also pretty much all inclusive. It has stress, mind, body, soul, spirit, if you ask me. This transforms our understanding of PTSD as more than just psychological, but as a biological injury as well. Um, because there's times we have physical manifestations of PTSD long term if we don't get it treated. But speaking of treatment, this can be treated, which I'll get into, I think, in a myth number 5 or something. All right, myth number 2. Most people that are exposed to trauma will develop PTSD. You know, the length of time that symptoms persist is what is key for a diagnosis of PTSD. And this is where a lot of people get a little confused. So the diagnostic definition of PTSD requires that symptoms persist longer than 30 days. Yet, for the majority of people who experience PTSD-like symptoms following a trauma, those symptoms usually resolve themselves within that month, within those 30 days, especially with the proper support. Um, well, I'm going to continue and then maybe I'll elaborate. So, for the majority of people that experience PTSD-like symptoms following the trauma, those symptoms usually resolve within a month, like I said, especially with the sport. But this is where PTSD meets betrayal gets a little hairy because, of course, we are affected for years after the betrayal. But that doesn't mean that the symptoms of PTSD last years. Rather, the effects of the betrayal last years. So there's the effects and the symptoms that are a little different. The symptoms, well, I'll get into that in a second. There are many components to why two people can go through virtually the same thing, and one can have PTSD and the other doesn't. Um, for instance, you can talk to a family of 5 and that, let's just say, they come from an extremely abusive home, and 2 or 3 of those people might have PTSD when the other siblings don't. And that depends on many, many factors, such as, um, your support system, healthy brain resilience to begin with, the intensity of the trauma. I mean, it really, um, sometimes even developmental. Sometimes people just have a more developmental equipped brain to handle a little bit more overwhelm to stress than say somebody else, so really it can get a little I don't want to say complex, but this is why it's very important that the individual talk to somebody and maybe take a test to see if they have um, PTSD. A more common cause of those symptoms is likely acute stress disorder. Now, acute stress disorder is a brief period of psychological stress following a life-altering or traumatic event. While common symptoms such as anxiety, insomnia, and a heightened reactivity make it easier to confuse the two disorders, acute distress disorder does not persist longer than 30 days. Both acute distress disorder and PTSD, however, are worthy of attention and the right care, of course. Myth number 3, only veterans can combat, and only veterans of combat can develop PTSD. And this is what I was saying before. I'm talking to people and their spouse will say, well, they've never been in a war zone. How in the world did I do what I did, give them PTSD? Most people still do associate PTSD with soldiers returning from combat. While it's true that many vets who see combat struggle with PTSD, they're not the only population affected by this injury. Again, it comes down to a person who experienced symptoms for at least 30 days. What are these symptoms? Flashbacks, intrusive thoughts, nightmares, physical sensations. Could be such as, pain, sweating, feeling sick, trembling, and how much do each of these have an effect on your nervous system? So you could be listening right now and saying, oh, yeah, I have intrusive thoughts. I have flashbacks. I have nightmares. Well, that's fine. But one person might have that after 30 days, 2%. And somebody after 30 days could have that, 9.5%, which would contribute to a diagnosis. The next myth is you have to experience extreme violence to get PTSD. And that's not true. That's not true. Now, again, it might depend on what your definition of violence is, but for this sake, I think they're talking about physical violence, but still, regardless, it's not true. According to the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, PTSD can absolutely occur if a person experiences or witnesses or is confronted with an event or events that involve actual or threatened death or serious injury. Now, in my own opinion, when you trust someone, especially a primary attachment, there's no doubt a death occurs. And if you, in my opinion, there's a myriad deaths that occur: the death of the relationship, as it were, the death of your safety, the death of who you thought this person was, the death of a dream, death of safety, and the list goes on. In addition to that, PTSD can also occur when a person's response involves intense fear, helplessness, or horror. And I'm fairly certain the majority of you watching this, and I can speak from experience, has experienced all of those and more after betrayal. I mean, you're pushed out of a plane at 30,000 feet by the person you trusted the most, and you have no parachute on. Of course, you're going to experience all that stuff. That's PTSD inducing. The last myth I just wanted to say, and I mentioned it before, is that PTSD is a life sentence. And, you know, I always say, even though there may not be things we necessarily heal from or get over, we absolutely can learn to manage them to the best of our ability and manage them quite well. The majority of people who struggle with PTSD can find effective relief. Successful treatments for PTSD absolutely do exist. And of course, they're evolving every day. Now, obviously, there are what is that, a stellar ganglion block for those that have physical PTSD. And then there's many, many, many things for emotional and mental PTSD. Traditional treatments can include anything from a combination approach of education, cognitive behavioral therapy, talk therapy, talk counseling, talk coaching, whatever, medication if necessary, even if temporary. I mean, there's a lot that can be done. Depending on what's needed and your ability to find what's needed, the positive effects that you can have from these treatments can actually be relatively quick. For example, if talking with a professional is what you need and it's most effective, and you find that professional, you can really tone down the PTSD symptoms and effect. If you need EMDR and you find somebody that does that, or somatic work and you find somebody that does that, what's difficult is that when you just find out there's a betrayal of some capacity in your life, the last thing you're thinking of is, do I need EMDR? Do I need talk therapy? Should I call out a coach? Do I need some somatic? You could hardly breathe. I mean, you're in a fetal position on your bed, on your bed, having a panic attack in survival mode. And that's what's sad about, well, many things that are sad about this. When you do get to the point where you can get up and say, okay, I need to call someone, well, unless you're financially completely healthy and wealthy, you have to call your insurance and say, okay, what does it cover? Does it cover this? Does it cover that? Then you've got to reach out to professionals. That professional may or may not be taking new clients. That professional may or may not specialize in what you need. If you reach out to a marriage therapist, but you and your spouse are trying to reconcile after infidelity, that marriage therapist might not be the best thing, you know. EMDR may or may not be the best thing for you. Somatic work may or may not be the best for you. I mean, there's a lot of, and then by the time you find somebody, you may prefer a male coach or counselor, or you may prefer a female coach or counselor, but only the other gender is available. Then you might like somebody with a bubbly personality like I have, and the next person might be turned off by a bubbly personality. So it's frustrating when you're trying to find somebody to help and you got to go through these hoops, and you just want to not feel pain anymore. I mean, it's a sad journey. It's a tough journey. Anyways, I hope you got a little something out of this class, as there is a lot of misinformation out there. on this injury. And challenging misinformation starts by breaking down stigmas of this invisible enemy. And of course, actively recognizing the signs of trauma in ourselves and those around us will help us really understand we may be venturing into the territory of PTSD, and we need to do something about it.